Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be taking a look at a 2020 case study
Mm-hmm.
called Poverty Measurement, Social Programs, and Amazonian Indigenous Peoples, a Peruvian case study with the Wampis people.
Wow.
And this one is fascinating. We're heading to the Peruvian Amazon to explore this really interesting issue of how poverty is measured
Right.
and its impact on the Wampis indigenous people.
Yeah.
And the thing that really caught our eye here is that the Peruvian government automatically categorizes all Amazonian indigenous people as living in extreme poverty.
Right.
But as we're going to uncover in this deep dive, this just doesn't line up with the reality of many indigenous communities,
Yeah.
particularly the self-sufficient lifestyles of the Wampis people. So
It's interesting how this study really
yeah.
exposes how flawed these standard poverty measurements are,
Yeah.
Like they just don't grasp the
Yeah.
reality of indigenous life.
Yeah. Right.
And it really makes you think about are we even using the right tools
Yeah.
to truly understand well-being,
Absolutely.
especially in these different cultural contexts?
Yeah. So let's break it down.
Yeah.
How does the Peruvian government actually define poverty?
Well, the report says that they mainly look at a family's income
Okay.
and whether or not their basic needs are met.
Okay.
They look at things like housing materials,
Yeah.
cooking fuels, appliances.
Right.
Are they connected to a market economy? Are they participating in that?
And that's where I think things start to get a little tricky because,
Yoli.
as you mentioned,
Yeah.
applying this approach to groups like the Wampis,
Yeah.
who might have, perfectly good homes
Right.
built with traditional materials,
Exactly.
and they're living off the land.
Yeah.
Abundant food from,
Yeah.
hunting, fishing, and farming. But because they're not engaged in that, cash economy,
Right.
they're automatically labeled as extremely poor.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like they're invisible to the system.
It's so interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
it overlooks the value of things like community cohesion,
Right.
traditional knowledge, their connection to the environment,
Yeah.
which are all central
Yeah.
to the Wampus' well-being.
Totally.
It just doesn't even show up.
And it has real consequences,
Yeah. Yeah.
for the Wampus.
Yeah.
Because then it shapes policy decisions,
Right.
resource allocation, and even how they're perceived
Right.
by the wider society.
It's like they're just completely misrepresented.
Yeah, and the report gives these
Yeah.
really vivid examples.
Mhm.
For instance, if a family hasn't spent money on food,
Right.
the government just assumes that they haven't eaten,
Right.
totally disregarding their traditional practices
Yeah.
of hunting and fishing and gathering.
Like as if that's not a thing.
Right.
Or like if your home wasn't built with materials that you bought in a store, it's like you don't have a real house.
Exactly.
And so you can see how these assumptions can lead to a real sense of mistrust.
Yeah.
And the report even quotes
Yeah.
a Wampis community member from the Indigenous Navigator survey
Okay.
who expresses this concern
Yeah.
that government programs are aimed at destroying indigenous peoples.
Wow,
Which is
that's a strong statement.
yeah, and it really underscores the tension there.
Yeah.
And this feeling that these programs, while perhaps well-intentioned,
Right.
are coming from an outside perspective that just doesn't understand their way of life.
Totally. And, that brings us to the case study of the Trintos program,
Yeah.
which is a conditional
Right.
cash transfer initiative.
Yeah, so essentially it aims to help families break free from poverty
Uh-huh.
by providing this financial aid.
Yeah.
But of course, there are strings attached.
Right.
Families have to meet certain requirements,
Yep.
mainly related to healthcare and education
Right.
to receive the money.
So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think on the surface, it sounds great,
Yeah.
but given the context we've just discussed.
Well, the report reveals that there are some
Yeah.
major issues with how Juntos is designed
Yeah.
and implemented,
Okay.
particularly for the Wampus
Right.
communities.
Yeah.
For example, the program assumes that families have easy access to healthcare
Right.
and secondary schools,
Okay.
which is often not the case.
Yeah.
Imagine you're required to take your children to these far-off services
Yeah.
that are often
Right.
of really poor quality
Yeah.
just to get this financial aid.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem...
That doesn't seem fair, does it?
No. And then on top of that,
Right.
the report also mentions these logistical hurdles,
Uh-huh.
like inaccessible payment locations
Right.
that require river travel. which can be super dangerous.
Especially during the rainy season.
So they're being forced to like risk their safety
Right.
for a relatively small amount of money.
It's like the program is just blind to like their way of life.
Their actual reality.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this example really begs the question, like, how do we measure well-being in a way that actually reflects the realities of these indigenous communities?
Yeah.
If income isn't the best indicator,
Right.
what are the options?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
And the report touches on things like community-based monitoring and participatory approaches.
Yeah.
Do you think those could be a better fit?
I think they sound really promising.
Yeah.
Because it seems like a much more empowering approach.
It is.
Yeah, it seems totally counterintuitive to try to measure poverty without fully understanding the communities you're trying to help.
You got to incorporate their knowledge, their perspective.
And this report uses a really striking analogy to describe this prevailing attitude towards indigenous land ownership.
Okay.
They call it.
What is it?
The dog in the manger.
Wow.
Implying that indigenous people are just seen as unproductive and like unable to effectively utilize their land.
So it's like this really condescending
it is
attitude toward how they relate to their land.
And it raises all these questions about, how we view and value different ways of life.
Absolutely.
Because if we only define progress in terms of economic output, we're going to miss.
You're going to miss a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The richness and resilience of these
communities.
Yeah.
Like we need to move beyond these narrow frameworks.
Yeah.
And acknowledge that there are multiple ways of knowing and being in the world.
Couldn't agree more.
And those different perspectives should be valued,
yes,
respected.
Yes.
Not dismissed or marginalized.
Yeah. So we've uncovered some major flaws in how poverty is measured in the Peruvian Amazon.
Right.
But I kind of want to zoom out a bit.
Okay.
Like, what does this mean for our listeners?
Yeah.
What are the broader implications of this case study?
I think it's a reminder that poverty is complex.
Yes.
And there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
It challenges us to examine our own assumptions about what poverty means, how we measure it.
Yeah.
And it highlights the need for like greater cultural sensitivity.
Absolutely.
And community involvement.
Yeah.
When designing and implementing social programs.
It's not enough to just come in with these solutions from the outside.
No. You need to understand, respect, collaborate with the communities you're trying to help.
That's a fantastic point.
It's not just about providing financial assistance.
Right.
It's about empowering these communities to define their own paths to well-being.
Love that.
Right.
Yeah, and it's made me really think about, these alternative approaches to addressing poverty.
Yeah.
Especially ones that center the voices and experiences of indigenous communities.
Yeah, it's crucial.
So we're gonna dive deeper into those broader implications in the next segment.
All right.
Of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
It's amazing how like this case study, it kind of highlights, this global struggle to like accurately measure poverty and design programs that are actually effective and respectful of, different cultures.
And like, are we even asking the right questions?
Yeah.
When we talk about poverty.
It really makes you think.
Yeah, what if like for the Wampis people, progress looks completely different than what our traditional economic indicators are telling us?
Like what if for them, progress is about, maintaining those strong community bonds, preserving their traditional knowledge, living in harmony with the environment.
Like things that we just don't even measure.
Things that our current metrics completely fail to capture.
And that brings us back to, this search for alternatives.
Yeah.
We talked about community-based monitoring and these participatory approaches.
Right.
Can you talk a bit more about those and how they might offer a more, accurate?
Yeah. So community-based monitoring is essentially about putting the power of data collection and analysis in the hands of the community itself.
Yeah,
so imagine Wampis community members.
Yeah.
Like defining their own indicators of well-being.
Okay.
Things that are meaningful to them.
Yeah.
And tracking their own progress over time.
That's huge.
It is.
Instead of having outsiders coming in with these checklists and surveys
Exactly.
is a totally different approach.
It's way more empowering.
And then,
And then you've got participatory approaches, which take it even a step further.
Okay.
So it's about involving the community in every single stage of program design and implementation.
So from
from identifying the needs to developing solutions to evaluating the outcomes.
So instead of imposing something like Juntos from the top down, it becomes this collaborative.
It's a collaboration between the government and the Wampis people.
So it's recognizing that expertise and agency of the community.
The ones who understand their own challenges the best. And what kind of support would be truly beneficial.
So it seems like these approaches, could lead to more sustainable and impactful solutions.
Absolutely.
But, obviously shifting from this top-down approach to a bottom-up approach would require a major change in mindset, right?
Yeah, it requires acknowledging that, there are multiple ways of knowing and being in the world.
Yeah.
It's about challenging those assumptions.
Yeah.
That economic growth is the only path to progress.
It's been so interesting to see how this deep dive has revealed the limitations of our current thinking about poverty.
Yeah.
It's not just about giving people money. It's about supporting
It's about empowerment.
Yeah.
It's about supporting these communities to define and achieve their own vision of well-being.
That's such a good point. And I'm curious, the report really focuses on the negative impacts of these programs like Juntos.
Yeah.
But it also mentions that a lot of the Wampis people actually do find the financial assistance helpful.
Yeah. It's important to acknowledge that for some families, especially in those areas where earning cash is difficult.
Right.
It does provide much needed support.
So it's not about demonizing the program.
Yeah, not at all.
But recognizing that.
It's about recognizing that.
The current form.
Yeah, the way it's currently designed is flawed.
So how could we reimagine it? Yeah. How could Juntos be redesigned to be more effective and respectful?
That's a great question.
Of the Wampis way of life.
And the report kind of hints at some potential solutions.
Yeah.
But it ultimately leaves it to us to grapple with these complex issues.
What if instead of
what if instead of imposing these conditions, you have to go to school, you have to go to the doctor, what if it offered families more flexibility in how they use the funds?
Give them the agency to decide
what's
best.
What's best for them.
Yeah, and what if those needs went beyond just the immediate financial assistance?
What if the program also invested in community-led initiatives? Building local schools that incorporate Wampis language and culture.
I love that.
Or supporting sustainable economic activities that align with their traditional practices.
Now we're talking.
Right.
It's not just about handouts.
It's about investing.
It's about investing in that community.
Long-term well-being. Allowing them to define their own path. To prosperity.
I love it.
That's the kind of shift we need to see.
Yeah.
If we're serious about addressing poverty.
Yes.
In a way that's effective and just...
Absolutely.
It's about moving beyond those simplistic solutions. And embracing the complexity of these issues.
And, this report focused on Peru, but I'm curious. Are there other examples around the world where this kind of community-centered approach is being implemented successfully?
That's a great question.
What can we learn?
And that's actually something we're going to explore in the final segment of our deep dive.
Okay, awesome.
Because there are these communities all over the world that are already doing this. Implementing these innovative solutions.
Amazing.
To address poverty and promote well-being on their own terms.
Yeah, it's really inspiring to think. There are communities all over the world that are already doing this, forging their own paths to well-being, using methods that might look totally different from, our conventional approaches to development. And I think, looking at these real-world examples can give us some valuable insights for moving towards more equitable and sustainable solutions.
So give me some examples.
Okay, so there's this fascinating initiative in the Philippines called the Indigenous Peoples Conserved Territories and Areas Conservator Program. And it recognizes that like deep connection that indigenous communities have
to their ancestral lands.
Yeah.
And it empowers them to manage and protect those territories.
What's been the impact of that?
Oh, it's been remarkable.
Okay.
They've seen significant improvements
yeah.
in biodiversity conservation.
Okay.
But also the communities themselves.
Yeah.
They've experienced like increased food security, improved livelihoods.
Okay.
And just a stronger sense of like cultural identity.
Yeah. It's amazing how, you know, recognizing and supporting these like indigenous knowledge systems can lead to such
great outcomes.
Yeah.
Both for the communities and for the environment.
So it really challenges the notion that indigenous communities are just passive recipients of aid.
Yeah.
They're active agents of change.
Absolutely.
And they're capable of shaping their own destinies.
This really highlights the importance of, you know, moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach to develop.
Recognizing the diversity.
Yeah, recognizing that diversity of cultures and contexts.
Tailoring the solutions accordingly.
Yeah, and it's not even just about, like, replicating specific programs or models.
It's about the principles.
It's about the principles of community ownership, participation, respect for indigenous knowledge,
listening to the community,
and supporting them to achieve their vision of a good life.
And that, I think, is a crucial takeaway.
It is.
From this whole deep dive.
Like, it's not enough to just acknowledge that poverty is complex. When you, like, go beyond the rhetoric and actually put these principles into practice.
And that requires, you know,
it does.
The change.
It requires a shift.
Yeah, a shift in power dynamics.
Yeah, from a system that dictates to one that collaborates.
Oh, we have to challenge our own assumptions and biases and be open to these new ways of thinking and doing.
And we all have a role to play.
We do.
In creating a more just and equitable world.
Whether it's supporting, you know, organizations, advocating for policy changes, or even just like educating ourselves.
Or even just having these conversations.
Yeah, having these conversations.
With our friends and family.
Yeah, you know, it all contributes.
Every little bit counts.
Yeah. And, you know, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. You know, this case study we explored, it doesn't offer any easy answers.
No, it doesn't.
But it does.
It does, though.
It gives us this powerful invitation to think critically about the systems we've created and to ask ourselves how we can be a part of building a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
That's the goal.
So as you go about your day, you know, we encourage you to consider this.
Yeah.
How can we dismantle these structures that perpetuates poverty and inequality?
Yeah.
And support indigenous communities to live with dignity and self-determination?
It's a big question, but
it is a big question.
It's one worth asking.
But one worth asking.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
On this deep dive.
Keep exploring.
Until next time.
Keep questioning.
Yeah.
And keep diving deep.